The first speaker is Archimandrite Cyril Hovorun, who is currently professor of ecclesiology, international relations, and ecumenism at the University College of Stockholm, and also, yes, also this semester invited professor teaching at the Gregoriana here in Rome. So welcome, Father Cyril.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Father Daniel, for inviting us to this meeting. Thank you also for your work to edit this volume, to put it together and to push it through the process of editing and publishing, which took some time. It's a privilege to be here at the PIO, and I'd like to make your life a bit easier, to skip my chapter when you read the book. I will summarize very briefly the main idea that I wanted to present in my chapter. Essentially, it's the idea that one can understand the events of the Lviv pseudo-sobor, I prefer to call it this way, against the backdrop of the political and social developments in the Soviet Union at the time. Those developments have been described in the sociology of religion as a political religion. This concept was coined in the interwar period in Europe to describe primarily fascism and Nazism, and was also applied to the left-wing totalitarian ideologies like communism at the time. The basic idea of a political religion is that there is a political system, a system of ideas, political ideas and beliefs, which can have a political nature, but they are believed. They are not just held as an idea. They are believed in the same way as people believe in religions. Even though those political religions may reject religion per se, as it is the case with communism, they nevertheless practice religion they have some very clear features of religion, like a cult, like doctrines, like heresies, like instruments or institutions of decision making. In the case of the Soviet ideology, of the Soviet version of communism, it was like the meetings of the Communist Party, which looked like, you know, the councils of the church. They venerated the relics, so to say, of Lenin and other leaders of the communist movement. They certainly upheld strictly the orthodoxy of Marxism, which they called Marxism-Leninism, and they rejected heresies of Marxism, such as Maoism, Trotskyism, and so forth. So there are clear resemblances between the Soviet ideology and orthodoxy as it was traditionally practiced in the Russian Empire. So that is the phenomenon of political religion, which one has to take into consideration while considering what was happening in the Soviet Union at the time. It is quite different from the concept of civil religion, which was coined a bit later on and was applied primarily to the situation in the West. It was first applied, well, of course, it was first coined by Jean-Jacques Rousseau and applied to the situation of France in the wake of the French Revolution, but then was successfully applied by American sociologists of religion to describe the American civil religion. In both cases, we are dealing with political systems or political cultures which look like religions, but they are essentially about politics. There is, however, a difference between them. The difference is the main kind of divergence between them is the way how they convince people to uphold those religions. The political religions are usually coercive. They force, they exercise force. They coerce people to believe, to uphold those religions. The civil religions, they are not forceful. They are not coercive. They function more like TV commercials. They can be annoying. They pop up all the time, but essentially they convince you to buy their product. They don't force you to buy their product. Unlike the political religions which actually force you to buy this ideology, to buy into this ideology. So the Soviet political religion, I believe, underpinned the Lviv Sobor of 1946, because all the features of this pseudo-Sobor stemmed somehow from this political culture of coercion, as it was practiced across the Soviet Union at the time. That's why it was coercive. No one asked the consent of the people of the Greek Catholic Church to participate in this council. They were forced, as we know, to participate, at least most of them. There were manipulations, there was coercion, and that's how the Greek Catholic Church disappeared, as a result of coercion, as a result, essential of a particular application of this Soviet political religion to the case of the Greek Catholic Church. If we look now at what is going on in Ukraine, it is nothing else but another manifestation of the same Soviet political religion, coercive in its nature. It also functions in the capacity and with the features of a religion. Well, now they call it the Russian world ideology, which is just another incarnation of the old ideologies of the past, upheld, in the Soviet Russia, before that in the Tsarist Russia, with the same kind of feature that unites all those incarnations of the same ideology. The main feature of this ideology is it's coercive. It forces people. Nowadays, it forces people to uphold it through force, through the danger of arrest in Russia, or through bombardments in Ukraine, and so forth. That's why I think the Lviv Sobor, pseudo-Sobor, was not just an event happening in the past. It is relevant to our days. In which sense? In the sense that it gives us a clue how to understand the present events. Why the church is coercive again? Why the church again contributes to this violence which is going on, which is affecting not just Ukraine but also Russia itself. Russia is now a kind of a kingdom of violence, or a kingdom of coercion in many senses. So that's something I wanted to emphasize as my first point, my point number one. And my last point number two, which I wanted to say, is that nowadays we are witnessing different narratives that try to justify the war in Ukraine. Those narratives come from the Kremlin and also from the church. All those narratives, they change all the time. If we look at the justifications for the war in the beginning of the war from Putin or from other speakers on behalf of the Russian establishment, they brought up one set of arguments. Now they are bringing up another set of arguments. So it's very liquid. It's very unstable and inconsistent. The torrent of arguments coming from the propagandists for this war. There are some features in this torrent of arguments which remain there. One of them is unionism. They keep repeating that essentially what they're trying to do in Ukraine, they try to repel, to rebuke, even if in advance, the advance of unionism. A popular thesis in the Russian propaganda is, look, it's the West which is fighting for its own interests in Ukraine, and one of their interests is to impose Roman Catholicism in Ukraine, to convert Ukraine to Roman Catholicism through unionism. This is one of the conspiracy theories, if you want, which circulate widely in Russia. And generally, I would say, if we look at the propaganda which is urged, by the Russian speakers, it's a sort of conspiracy theory, not very far from QAnon, these conspiracy theories in a sense, because they believe in a global government which is behind the scenes, and this global government wants to impose, an agenda, wants to destroy Russia as the last kind of stronghold against the global dominance of the evil forces, and Ukraine is a battlefield between this unseen global government of evil and Holy Rus, which stands against it. And according to this conspiracy theory, which is propagated by many, including from the church, the Catholic Church plays a kind of a key role. They believe that the Catholic Church is to a great extent behind this war of the West against Ukraine. That's why they say, look, the entire Ukrainian project by its nature, it's unitist. Because the purpose of Ukraine, of very existence of Ukraine, is to challenge the Russian civilization, as they call it, and to impose, to replace orthodoxy, substitute orthodoxy in Ukraine with unitism, and in the ultimate kind of, at the ultimate stage with the Catholic Church. This is a clear, a pure conspiracy theory, completely wrong, but it captivates, you know, the imagination of many in Russia, and actually promotes this this sort of worldview and these sort of explanations for the war. That's why I believe it is important to have this book, like this one, to contest, to argue against those conspiracy theories that, you know, that what I've described. It's important in order to like instill truth, even for our days. It's important for Ukraine to have this kind of arguments which are exposed in this book. It's important to have this book as an important means of counter-propaganda, if you want. And it's also important to have this book to advance our dialogue. Because again, as you probably know, all of you know, the issue of unitism has become really an important impediment in the ongoing Orthodox-Catholic dialogue. It has become such an impediment since the collapse of the Soviet Union in the early 90s. That's why in Balamant, when the commission, Joint Commission for Orthodox-Catholic Dialogue met in Balamant, they adopted a declaration, an important Balamant declaration on unitism. That's why actually the issue of unitism was brought up to the dialogue again and again, all the time, every time. Sometimes this issue, kind of put the dialogue on pause, like what it was in Baltimore in 2000, when the Joint Commission met in Baltimore. They again started discussing the issue of unitism. They disagreed on everything, primarily the Orthodox. The Orthodox with one another disagreed, and they actually decided not to continue the dialogue, and the dialogue was resumed much later. In the dialogue, in the Orthodox-Catholic dialogue, my question is whether the issue of unitism is the reason to impede the dialogue, or it's an excuse to impede the dialogue. I personally believe it's rather an excuse. It's more an excuse than a reason. There are other reasons why the churches, some churches didn't want to continue the dialogue. But they somehow camouflaged this unwillingness to continue the dialogue by bringing up the issue of unitism. That's why the issue of unitism is like a screen smoke. It's like a pretext, like a pretension why we should, you know, why we should not discuss real issues, really important for the Orthodox-Catholic dialogue. And the real issues are substituted with those false pretensions, and I believe unhelpful and unreasonable pretexts why we should discuss the issue of unitism instead of, you know, going forward in the dialogue. That's why I believe, well, the collapse of the, well, I hope that, well, we in Ukraine, we will win eventually. I'm speaking as Ukrainian. Then this will challenge the conspiracy theory that brings unitism, you know, to the core of the propaganda. I hope that this theory will collapse. Everyone will see its falseness. And it will help eventually to reinvigorate the dialogue, the Orthodox-Catholic dialogue. The book like this one will be a very helpful contribution to both things, to rebuke all those conspiracy theories, but also to invigorate the Orthodox-Catholic dialogue. I hope this will be like that. Thank you for your attention.